The BBC are hitting the news for fraudulent journalism. Now, the irony is it's Sky News who are reporting on this. This is how I thought journalism would work in the aftermath of the greatest fraud of our times in sport, the Abu Dhabi fix. Let's listen to this.
Good morning, it's 7 o'clock. Welcome to Mornings with Ridge and Frost.
With Sophie and Wilf, good morning from both of us. Lots of news today.
Two BBC bosses, Director General Tim Davie and the Chief Executive of News, Deborah Tenness, quit over an impartiality scandal.
Donald Trump claims the credit welcoming their departures and saying a BBC Panorama programme was purposefully dishonest over an edit of his speech.
This is far from the first time that the BBC have been dishonest in the reporting of an event. Sky Sports were the perpetrators of the dishonesty at the Abu Dhabi 2021 Grand Prix. Their commentary team lied to the world prior to the so-called error taking place to condition the minds of people to believe it was even to be a possibility. No form of media has ever revealed the truth. This is the BBC's version of that event. Ros Atkins, the presented BBC journalist, the so-called trusted correspondent who breaks down the truth of the key issues. Let's go through this.
On Sunday, Max Verstappen won the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix and with it his first Formula One World Championship.
This was the ultimate dream, and now that we have achieved that, basically for me everything what comes next is a bonus.
What comes next has been controversy. Minutes after the
they can describe controversy. Let's see if they can hit the key elements.
Race, Williams driver George Russell pressed caps lock and tweeted, "This is unacceptable."
Not relevant.
Well, this is former F1 driver David Coulthard.
A sequence of events that none of us have seen before.
That should tell you something, so they bring forward an expert to just say that little soundbite.
The story starts with the World Championship going into the final race, with Verstappen and the seven-time champion Hamilton tied on 369.5 points.
Manufactured, but I'm not going to get into that in this video.
It would all come down to the final race of the season in Abu Dhabi, and after qualifying, the scene was set.
The two contenders equal on.
Again, put forward a independent expert, a motorsport writer, to set the scene.
Points side by side on the front row of the grid. You could not write a better plot than this.
They did.
But this story had only just begun. On the first lap, Hamilton took the lead. Then, as Verstappen tried to overtake, Hamilton left the track, cut a corner and stayed in front. After
Context. Max Verstappen dive-bombed, crowded his opponent off the track, didn't receive a penalty. They projected that Lewis Hamilton was the villain in that incident and should have received a penalty. The opposite of the truth. Nobody to analyse that and explain that to people correctly.
Which race director Michael Masi decided Hamilton could keep the lead. Former F1 team owner Eddie Jordan was unimpressed.
From me, bring forward another expert, another familiar face to those people that recognise the sport, to explain it wrongly for an agenda.
Masi was wrong. He should have asked Lewis to give back the place because Lewis ran off the road and he took a fair advantage as a result.
Had he have attempted to remain on the road, he'd have been hit by a dive-bombing Verstappen. He had to take evasive action. The offence, the infringement, is called crowding your opponent off the track by going into a corner too fast and not leaving them track room on exit of that corner. They are the facts. They are the facts, punishable by the FIA International Sporting Code, their regulations, which the stewards failed to apply to that driver.
But Hamilton stayed put. The F1 Twitter account told us we're into the second half of our title decider and it's
nobody cares about the F1 Twitter account.
Looking good for Lewis Hamilton. And so it was. The race was 58 laps and Hamilton's lead was over 10 seconds. Soon
12 seconds.
We heard from Red Bull's team principal, Christian Horner. He told Sky Sports, "We're going to need a miracle in these last 10 laps to turn it around. He needs some luck from the racing gods."
You want to tell us a nice story, do you, Ros? Or do you want to break down the facts of the situation?
And with 5 laps to go, that luck arrived for Max Verstappen. The Canadian driver Nicholas Latifi crashed. There was debris.
At the beginning of that lap, his race engineer said to him, "It has to be this lap, Nicholas."
All over the track. The cars didn't stop, but they stopped racing, and they now followed the safety car.
Which is the protocol. If a safety concern happens in a Grand Prix, race control, who oversee the event to make sure it's carried out safely and in accordance with the regulations of the sport, they often deploy the safety car so that that track can be cleared. Once you deploy the safety car, you have to carry out procedures prior to the resumption of racing. You neutralise the race, all racing stops, all of the gaps that have been built up between all of the competitors get wiped out. But if cars have started to lap other cars, you have to carry out a mandatory procedure prior to the resumption of that race. That procedure restores sporting fairness to all competitors, because competitors have to queue up in the order that they appear on that track. That doesn't necessarily mean it's the race order at that period of time. You've got to reinstate the race order, so all of the cars are in the correct race order, with all of the previously built up advantages between them wiped out prior to resuming racing again. There was not time to do that, which meant that this race had to end under that safety car condition. That meant that Lewis Hamilton won that race and achieved the title, the record-breaking achievement of becoming an 8-time world champion. This is a British lad achieving something that had never been done before. This is the British Broadcasting Corporation's version of explaining it to everybody.
Laps counted, so if the safety car did 5 laps, Hamilton would be world champion. But with the final lap approaching, the race director ordered the safety car to come in and crucially decided that the lapped cars between Hamilton and Verstappen should stay there. Verstappen would need to pass all of them and Hamilton in one lap.
That's not allowed. The car directly behind Hamilton was in 7th position at that time. 6th position had disappeared off around the track and was now at the end of this safety car snake. The deployment of the safety car to deal with a safety issue caused Lando Norris at that stage in 7th position to lose a lap on the car that he was challenging. Hence, you've disrupted sporting fairness to all competitors by the deployment of that safety car. Hence, you have legally written regulations that everybody knows what they're for. Everybody knows the purpose of them. They all compete under those regulations. They've been competing under those regulations since the beginning of the 2012 season. 199 Grand Prix have been contested under those regulations. And now, nobody can explain those regulations or their purpose. And the BBC expert is here to just tell you how it is.
At this point, the race director was told by Red Bull's Christian Horner, "We need one more lap." Shortly afterwards, there was a U-turn.
They reversed the decision, allowing Verstappen to be just half a second bunched up right behind Lewis Hamilton as the safety car left the track, which was with just one lap to go.
What you're not telling us is they didn't remove the 2 cars which they are required to remove, that are in between Max Verstappen in 2nd and Carlos Sainz in 3rd. That blocks Carlos Sainz off in 3rd from being able to challenge for a top 2 position in a Grand Prix. That's not allowed. They didn't remove the 8th car, Mick Schumacher, the 8th of the lapped cars that wasn't released. He was in between Valtteri Bottas and Yuki Tsunoda. No, they skewed the sporting outcomes. They didn't afford the 8 cars that should have been released, only 5 were. They afforded time to make it around the track, to catch the back of the pack, to restore sporting fairness to all competitors, and that is the mandatory restart condition. Has the BBC said any of that?
That wasn't all, though. While the lap cars between Hamilton and Verstappen were cleared, other lap cars were not, to the bemusement of F1 journalist Chris Medland.
So we bring in another expert. Let's see if he can identify the problem with not removing them. Such as Carlos Sainz in 3rd, being disadvantaged from being able to challenge for a top 2 position.
It should either have been that those cars were still in the way.
It shouldn't have been that. That's a false option. It's not allowed. You cannot resume racing without carrying out that mandatory regulation that they then tried to present as being somehow optional. It categorically is not.
Or that all of the cars had to go past, and in that case, it would have meant the race probably finished on the safety car. And
categorically would have finished behind the safety car, because the evidence is such that those lapped cars will have had to have been released prior to the end of lap 56. At the end of lap 56, the marshals at turn 14, who were on track clearing up the crash site, they were only departing the track as that safety car snake was passing the incident. There was not time to release those cars on lap 56 because the track was not declared safe whilst they were on lap 56. The earliest possibility of those lapped cars being released was on lap 57. The regulation is once the last lapped car has passed the leader, the safety car will return to the pits at the end of the following lap, which guarantees it as being a safety car finish. The BBC cannot articulate that and never have in the 4 years that have almost passed since.
Lewis Hamilton would have been world champion.
That didn't happen, though. Instead, we had a one-lap shootout, to the fury of Hamilton's Mercedes team boss Toto Wolff. He told the race director, "You need to reinstate the lap before, that's not right." To which Michael Masi replied, "Toto, it's called a motor race, OK?" Lewis Hamilton also said on race radio, "This has been manipulated."
Yes, it has been manipulated. They broke the rules to manufacture a one-lap shootout, knowing full well that the guy that they were advantaging was massively favourite to win that based on the circumstances that had then ensued. He'd been able to change his tyres without any jeopardy of losing track position in a situation where Lewis Hamilton would have been subject to maximum jeopardy, because had that race ended behind the safety car, which is what it would have predicted to do based on data of how long these type of incidents take. They take on average 5.5 laps of racing out of a race before racing resumes. There were less than that remaining when the incident happened, so therefore it would indicate a safety car finish. You cannot, if you go into the pits and your opponent doesn't, and they take the track position and the race ends behind the safety car, you've thrown away the race win, you've thrown away the championship. They broke the rules to manufacture that last lap. The BBC cannot tell you that.
Rejected by the F1 authorities. This has been manipulated. That's rejected by the F1 authorities.
But the BBC can tell you that F1 authorities have rejected that. Have you investigated their claim? Or have you just actually given a platform for their claim? Has the BBC investigated the authenticity of F1's claim? No, you haven't. You've just platformed it, haven't you?
And as the championship reached its finale, Verstappen passed Hamilton, fended off a counter-attack and won. The race was over, the story wasn't. Mercedes lodged 2 appeals to overturn the result. Both were rejected. Hamilton himself congratulated Verstappen.
Talk us through those appeals. You don't. They were entirely corrupt. Mercedes were appealing to the governing body of the sport that the governing body has broken its rules, which it had. What did the governing body do in those appeals? They, rather than compare what was being appealed with the rules and determine that yes, indeed, those rules had been broken, they invited in Red Bull to ask Red Bull to go away to create an argument to counter Mercedes' appeal, and then they sided with the Red Bull argument. That is entire corruption. Can you tell us that, Roz? No, you can't. The world hasn't been informed of that because the BBC has never revealed that.
And we all tried to make sense of what had happened. David Coulthard offered this explanation.
And the sporting regulations are hugely complex as well.
Oh, they're just complicated. Don't you worry your little head.
The sequence of events of only allowing 5 cars to overtake Lewis before the safety car came in is not something that typically has happened before.
It's never happened before.
So if David Coulthard says that, does that mean the race director was wrong? Not necessarily.
The FIA do have another rule which allows the race director to override that and make the decision he feels is correct.
No, absolutely wrong. Once a race director deploys a safety car to deal with a safety incident, he is bound by the protocols that are associated with the safety car. He's bound to carry out those regulations so that prior to the resumption of any racing, sporting fairness is restored to all those competitors, because that sporting fairness is disrupted by having to deal with a safety concern in a race. The only overriding authority he has is by overseeing the event. If he determines that it's still not safe and he needs to prolong the use of that safety car, then he has that discretion. he doesn't have the discretion to cut that procedure short without carrying it out in full, because it produces skewed outcomes that impacts different racers in different ways, compromising sporting outcomes for sporting competitors, compromising the result generated. There is a requirement in the FIA International Sporting Code that the regulations are never applied so as to compromise sporting integrity. David Coulthard can't tell you that. Ros Atkins can't tell you that.
This leads us to BBC Sports F1 correspondent Andrew Benson.
And corrupt journalist Andrew Benson, BBC's chief journalist of Formula One, he can't tell you that either.
Benson's conclusion that the sporting regulations do not cover this specific situation.
They categorically do. And Andrew Benson of the BBC has lied to everybody.
That the sporting regulations do not cover this specific situation.
Yes, the safety car is deployed to deal with a safety incident. You carry out then the safety car regulations, which is, once the track has been declared safe, you carry out the procedure, which is, you give the message to all of the cars that the lapped cars will now be being released, so that the lapped cars are aware that they are to go, and the other cars are aware that there's going to be cars overtaking them. Then, once the last of those cars passes the leader in the safety car remains on track for at least a further lap. It completes the lap that it's on and does one additional lap to give those released cars the opportunity of making it around the track to catch the back of that safety car snake. So what it intends to achieve is a snake of cars in the correct race order with all of the previously built up advantages between all cars wiped out. That produces the restart condition. That's when the safety car then returns to the pits. Race control can keep that safety car out on track. If that condition has not been met, the race director, Michael Massey, did that on 4 separate occasions, keeping that safety car out on track for a further lap to ensure that those released cars made it fully around the track to catch the back of the pack. So that race director was fully aware. You can also keep that safety car lapping if you see another safety concern which requires dealing with. So despite carrying out the regulation of releasing the cars and then cars having caught up, if you identify further issues, you can still keep the safety car on the track and ensure that you're overseeing that event with safety being of foremost importance.
Meanwhile, Hamilton's Mercedes team have lodged an intention to further appeal, and the new champion says of Lewis Hamilton, of course it helps if you have already 7 titles. That comforts him a bit.
That's nothing, BBC. Another fluff element of this fraudulent presentation by a fraudulent expert, a fraudulent journalist, conspiring to cover up a crime. A sporting crime, a global fraud. Now what we have is a fraud taking place in the UK courts. Before I go on to the fraud taking place in the UK courts, we'll just complete this and then listen to what the BBC's top brass have to say.
Certainly there's plenty of comfort for Formula One as it navigates this controversy. This was high-octane drama which demanded the world's attention in a way many sports can only dream of.
Yes. The sport of Formula One defrauded 108.7 million viewers who are watching that live. That made the sport of Formula One lots of money. They got the kiddies excited by manufacturing drama in a so-called sporting event to create a last lap shootout. The world title being settled on the last lap of the last Grand Prix of the season. You couldn't make it up. But you did manufacture it. And your media has lied to the world in presenting it. So, we'll then listen to this one. This is what is reported again on Sky News. The irony, because it was Sky Sports F1 where this event played out live, and Martin Brundle and David Croft were lying about what was possible in those last few laps of the race, suggesting that the race could resume with the lapped cars in situ. And even if they did carry out the regulation of releasing the lapped cars, how long would it be before the race got going again? They primed everybody with that possibility.
To make one thing very clear, BBC News is not institutionally biased.
Yes, you are. You perpetrated an agenda.
That's why it's the world's most trusted.
Yes, because you gaslight everybody into trusting you. You are not to be trusted. You are filthy scum who push agenda. Whose agenda are you pushing? That of the wealthy. That of the establishment that ultimately control government decisions, who ultimately control law courts so that decisions are made to protect them. Not for justice, not for truth. Hence, we introduced the notion of a legal argument, it all being too complex for everybody to understand, and that's why we see so many corrupt decisions made under the guise of so-called law.
News provider. And if you'll excuse
why did you
me,
fail? Why did you
I would
fail
like
to
just
deal
go
with the
in
mistakes that were made?
and see my teams. Thank you so much.
This is not a mistake, it's a systematic contrivance.
Do you think that the journalists are corrupt, like President Trump says? Do you think the journalists
Of course our journalists aren't corrupt.
Of course your journalists are corrupt. Ros Atkins, Andrew Benson, entirely corrupt.
Our journalists are hard-working people who strive for impartiality.
I've just evidenced otherwise. I've got a ton of evidence on this channel evidencing the sorts of things that Andrew Benson has said in the aftermath of Abu Dhabi 2021. None of the BBC journalists has ever revealed the truth about Abu Dhabi 2021, the biggest global sporting fraud of our time.
And I will stand by their journalism.
Yes, well, when they go to prison, so will you.
Is there institutional bias at the BBC?
There is no institutional bias. Mistakes are
Barefaced liar.
made, but there's no institutional bias.
Yeah. But you won't go to prison because you're part of the establishment, those who are in the courts, the judges, who then won't find part of their machine guilty of misleading the people, conditioning people with an agenda, absolving the perpetrators of the manufacturing of such events not guilty of their crimes. It continues. You go to BBC Sport now, you go to their page and you scroll down, and how long have we got to go before we find the information? Oh, a week ago. Mistakes, not Crashgate, it's over a week ago. The 29th of October, reported by a BBC Sport journalist, talking about a legal case where this driver, Felipe Massa, is supposedly taking Formula One, the FIA, and Bernie Ecclestone to court to claim 60 million in damages for supposedly being robbed out of a world championship back in 2008. The entire case is a facade. The entire case has been constructed with the intention of losing it, because I've ripped that apart and demonstrated that Massa was not the victim of their fraudulent contrivance. The true victims are all of the employees of all of those teams that missed out on huge payments. Nico Rosberg, Timo Glock, Nick Heidfeld, and what's the other one? The Finnish driver, Heikki Kovalainen. All in my other videos. The case is constructed by corrupt barristers. The FIA's barrister is also a UK judge, seeking, in return, this case being quashed, which it will be, but in return a ruling for the FIA to protect the FIA and Formula One from future challenges to their historic events. They want to protect themselves from being held accountable to that fraud of Abu Dhabi 2021 with this case that Massa has now brought, which is an entire facade. Primed by Bernie Ecclestone to bring this case against Bernie Ecclestone. Not a single BBC journalist or expert can break it down like that. It's because the BBC is institutionally corrupt, and it is mind conditioning people with the agendas of the so-called elite, those who are in the establishment who control the narrative of what they want people to believe and comply with. There's a channel that's been calling this out ever since this began. F1 Unfiltered. They've got a campaign where they seek a inquiry into the BBC's coverage of Abu Dhabi 2021, along with various other things, because the BBC are institutionally corrupt. So go and check out any one of their videos, there will be a link to what it is that they are seeking to do in their videos, and their videos are truly revealing in terms of the corruption that the BBC perpetrates. Please share this. Please make people aware of just how corrupt the British Broadcasting Corporation is and how we are misfed information to comply with an agenda, a narrative. For those of you who truly care, in the space of Formula One, people generally just see it as light entertainment. But it's a perfect example of how corruption works. How the media is utilised to feed us a narrative, feed us a version of events that people are then conditioned to accept. That version covers up what is really going on, that things are being manufactured for the interests of the wealthy. It is all corrupt. The governing body, the so-called governing body of the sport, is controlled by the billionaire entities that want to create outcomes, and the governing body of the sport utilise their rules and regulations, apply them in an indiscriminate, non-uniform manner to impact the outcomes for different drivers, contriving results in this so-called sport. And now we have a court case where a British judge is presenting on their behalf, in his acting role as a barrister, to create a rule which then becomes a law to protect them from their corruption. That is the height of corruption perpetrated by the British establishment. And the BBC is a key arm of that mind conditioning machine. Please share this to wake people up. Thank you for your time.